Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Delight to be with you here. I have with me Saman Farid of Baidu Ventures, and we're going to learn a little bit about how Baidu Ventures thinks about its investment philosophy, which is focused entirely on artificial intelligence, what its relationship is with its rich uncle, Baidu, which is also thinking a lot about AI, and maybe we'll get to how China might win the AI race, as a lot of people seem to think today, or at least we'll ask our expert to handicap a little bit what might be some of the pros and cons given some of the global challenges at the moment. But let's start off with your definition of artificial intelligence, because I have discovered, writing a lot about innovation for The Economist over the last 25 years, that aside from the word innovation itself, the phrase AI might have become the most abused phrase in the English language, especially on corporate PowerPoints. So what do you define as your universe of artificial intelligence?
Sure. So first, thanks so much for hosting, and also thanks to CB Insights for putting this together. Hopefully we don't put everybody to sleep after lunch. You know, there's this kind of post-lunch coma.
Well, that depends on you, really.
I'll do my best. Yeah. So yeah, to answer your question about AI, honestly, I think it covers so much, and the scope of what it covers is growing so much every day. I think to put it simply, the way we think about it is, using data to make better decisions. That's ultimately kind of I think in its purest form, the definition of AI. I think we think of it as artificial intelligence only until it's solvable. Once it's solvable, then we call it something else. I think like a lot of kind of stochastic reasoning and all these things that were previously.
This is one of the common complaints of AI pioneers, right? As soon as they crack the code on something difficult, we don't call it AI anymore.
Absolutely.
And so you give a very pleasing but somewhat slippery definition.
Sure.
So maybe let me try to get you to be a little more concrete. Give us an example of something that you wouldn't invest in that would still fit your definition. So, what are your boundaries? What is it that you think is just not connected to AI?
Yeah, well, I think to put a finer point on it, I think ultimately in the next 5 years or 10 years, everything is going to have a very big component of AI built into it. So from that perspective, you're right. Like it could be in anything. But I think what we particularly focus on is the things where AI is the major driving force. So there's a lot of areas where that's not the case. For example, a lot of consumer products, it's more about the brand or the marketing, or do you have the right channels, or do you have the right relationships? Like those are the types of areas where startups are definitely having innovation. There's, for example, value created in connecting different sides of a marketplace or things like that, like an Airbnb. Those are the types of things where we probably wouldn't make an investment because AI is not the most important factor in making those companies succeed. Whereas there's some areas that are very close to those where AI does play a big role. For example, recently there's a lot of success in China with ByteDance's recent products like TikTok and Toutiao, and these companies have gotten very large. And sure, there's like an aspect of it which is gathering quality content. There's an aspect of it which is gathering lots of high quality users at a low enough kind of customer acquisition cost. But fundamentally, it's about this matching algorithm of being able to find the right feed for the right people at the right time, and being able to customize it to the individual level. So at a high level, if I was to think about what does AI mean, it's basically being able to take what were previously very big decisions, like you may have to decide, for example, for your magazine, like what's it going to be about, and you have to do that at the outset, or for your production line, you have to decide, maybe on a yearly basis or on a quarterly basis, like what's the production plan, and taking those big decisions and then breaking them up into millions of small decisions that you can make in real time.
I don't like where this is going. The job security is one of the few things we old-time journalists.
Well, there's,
are you predicting? Are you ready to predict it, as with Toutiao, the Chinese example,
sure,
a news aggregator, that journalism will be defeated or improved ultimately by AI replacing journalists?
No, absolutely not. I think journalism is such an important thing. I think it's what AI can do is some of the rote work, which is, for example, researching data from lots and lots of sources, being able to help with the distribution, being able to identify the audience. But ultimately, like the insights that come out of that require a much more contextual view, and the data that's needed for that much larger contextual view generally is not going to be in the numbers. It's going to be in, there's so many kind of implicit factors that you need to take into account. I'm sure you probably know much better than me what it takes to be a good journalist, but I don't think it's purely just about calculation. The things that are purely about calculation, AI is going to be able to do much better than any of us.
Sure. I mean, it's been argued, of course, that AI is a wonderful prediction machine.
Sure.
But the curation aspect or judgment, at least for now, still remains with us in this room. So let's cling on to it as much as we can.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you structured your investments. Or do you look at through industry verticals, or do you look for the technologies involved? And give us a sense of the companies you've invested in and how you go about picking them.
Sure. I think maybe first I'll dispel kind of a misunderstanding that often happens because our name is Baidu Ventures, that we are kind of Baidu's corporate investment arm. We're actually like an independent fund that the GPs, which is myself and 2 other partners, set up in partnership with Baidu. And the reason that we set it up that way is because we felt like the best investments had to come from a financial perspective, and we had to use the things that a company like Baidu has available to help us make those investments. So we're not investing in things purely because they have some kind of alignment or fit with Baidu or their needs. So in terms of how we allocate that capital.
But having said that, though, you can't throw a statement like that out there without some challenge.
Yeah.
You are called Baidu Ventures. You do focus on an area that basically Baidu has bet its future on AI.
Sure.
In an effort, it must be said, to catch up with Tencent and Alibaba, who had sprung ahead in recent years.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think
Baidu's
Baidu's been ahead in
Economist
AI
would know why,
much
but
longer.
we'll leave that aside. But nevertheless, there's a big bet being made by Baidu on AI.
Sure.
So when you say you're not a conventional corporate venture fund, just doing what headquarters wants, give us a sense of what that means in terms of where you're investing. That's not obviously a slam dunk for Baidu, but just might be a good financial return.
For sure. So I think that maybe I'll just going more contextual.
Sure.
To answer your question previously, I think Baidu's been spending the last maybe 8 years, 10 years doing kind of some of the most advanced work in AI research. And recently they've published lots and lots of papers and stuff around that topic. And Baidu as a company sees itself as an enabler of AI technologies. So this kind of platform of stuff that they've built around natural language processing, computer vision, a lot of the cloud-related products, are feeding a lot of new applications. Some of those new applications, Baidu can take advantage of itself. For example, using AI to do better search ranking, or using AI to do better ad placement, or using AI to do self-driving cars, which they have in the Apollo program. But the majority of the applications that come as a result of AI, Baidu has no way of being involved in or taking advantage of. But we see that as being a very useful set of things for example, using AI to solve problems in the construction industry, or agriculture, or manufacturing, or healthcare. These are things that Baidu itself, not only is not interested in doing, but also doesn't have the capacity to do. But the things that Baidu has accumulated in its process of becoming an AI powerhouse is very useful for these types of companies. For example, Baidu has 35,000, 40,000 people that do annotation for computer vision in the self-driving car project and other internal projects. That team, of course, goes through waves of how useful it is for Baidu. When there's lots of data, they do a lot of annotation, and when there's not a lot of data, they don't have a lot of work to do. So we've been able to carve that out, for example, for our portfolio companies, and say, you may be doing the recycling of trash using a computer vision system. Why don't, instead of like the poor founders sitting at home drawing bounding boxes around each kind of discarded carton, they can just send hundreds of thousands of images to this team, and they can annotate it in a matter of days. So I think that's how this kind of symbiotic relationship works, where there's a bunch of tools that Baidu's built as an AI company, and we think those tools are useful for startups. And that's why we decided to partner with Baidu. So they not only put up most of the capital, but they also put up a lot of these resources. And we've set up this deal with them where basically they're not allowed to ask us for any information. They're not allowed to ask us for any control about any of our portfolio companies. We have a very strict firewall, but we're able to go in and yank resources out of Baidu and make it useful for our portfolio companies.
How about cost of capital? Do you think you might have an advantage there, having a relationship with Baidu?
Absolutely. So in addition to the money that they put into our fund, we've been able to work with Baidu around getting other carve-outs of capital that we can use for things that are probably more adventurous than your typical venture fund would do. So one of the examples we were talking about earlier was sponsoring research in academic labs. So we think that there's a lot of really, really breakthrough AI technology that just hasn't found a commercial application yet. Generative adversarial networks, which were just mentioned, is a really, really good example of that. We see hundreds of really cool applications of that on a day-to-day basis that we think should be done. But of course, the people who are working in that field don't have the time to go research research, how do you build a social media app, or how do you build, the next generation of kind of production systems. So because we have those ideas, we basically go and sponsor that type of research, and we say no strings attached. Let's sponsor your research to start doing experimentation around new applications for this research. That's the kind of thing that a traditional venture fund by itself can't do. And then once kind of early indications come back from those experiments, we can fund them properly from our venture fund.
So this might even give you a longer investment horizon, let's say.
Absolutely.
And to see how things, does it also change your risk tolerance? Would you go that far as to say that it affects how you make decisions about risk?
Yeah, definitely. I think because of the capital sources that we have, and because of the size of our fund, right now we're managing 4 funds altogether, which add up to about $800 million. It allows us to carve out pieces of each of those funds to do what we think of as experiments. Like ultimately, all of us who are on the team think of ourselves as a new startup, right? We're running this new experiment. We're independent. If we don't make good investments, we're going to die. And so that forces us to go and try to do things that are a little bit unconventional. The grant program is one great example. We also spend a lot of energy and effort on kind of more hands-on programming. So for example, in China, because we think that there's a really big application of AI into manufacturing or industrial use cases, we've gone and set up kind of an AI training program. And this AI training program, basically we bring together about 50 entrepreneurs and about 50 executives from industry. So these are from traditional industrial players in China.
Would you call these IoT plays, or you think of them distinct from the 5G, Internet of Things?
Yeah, I don't particularly like the word IoT because I think it's very loose and it covers a lot of different things.
Yeah.
What they are is basically potential customers, right? People who have huge industrial processes that they're running today. Maybe automotive companies, it may be appliance makers, it may be steel mills, it may be coal-fired power plants, it may be water treatment plants and sewage plants. All of these types of companies are generating data from their sensors, not nearly enough, and could use IoT to generate more. But we think that there's huge opportunities to transform the way that they do their work. And so we set up this training program where we basically spend one weekend a month for about 6 months for basically 2 full days with these 50 entrepreneurs and these 50 corporates, where we talk about kind of what AI has made possible over the last few years and where it's going. We talk about things like generative adversarial networks or deep reinforcement learning or these things that are big breakthroughs, and help them understand what that might mean for their business. And we get insights kind of in return about, like maybe if you use AI to manage kind of all the pumps and heat exchanger and all these things in your sewage plant, you may be able to get X amount of efficiency gains, and that changes your bottom line by some other.
Is that reaching to the end user through Baidu's connections, or you're doing it independently as a venture fund?
Both, yeah, both.
And do you see in any way helping startups get to market faster as one of the advantages that Baidu offers as a partner, or you don't necessarily see it that way, or you won't coerce your startups to go down a particular path that way?
Oh yeah, I mean, ultimately we definitely don't coerce them to do anything, hopefully. I think what we want is what's best for the company.
Let's say encourage.
Yeah, I mean, the way we think about it is, at the minimum, the companies that we invest in should know about what's happening in China. Actually, not only the companies we invest in, everybody should know about what's happening in China because it's so relevant, but in particular, the companies we invest in, we make a really big effort to, at the minimum, you should know what are your potential competitors from China, what are the potential opportunities in China, as well as in other places that China has a big influence, for example, Southeast Asia or Central Europe or all these places or Central Asia, where gradually there's more and more of an opportunity because of things like the Belt and Road Initiative that China is doing or things like that to upgrade industry at a whole scale. There's certain things where the US clearly has the best applications, right? So for example, in the healthcare industry or pharmaceutical industry, probably very few places rival the US in terms of the amount of R&D spending that's put into it. But when it comes to like the supply chain or warehousing, it's probably gonna be very difficult to make changes in the US because a lot of the infrastructure has already been there for the last 50 years. Whereas right now, if you go to China, like it's very common for a startup to go to a big company and say, why don't you rebuild an entirely new warehouse built around my idea and my my designs and my methodology and my robots.
Right.
And that typically happens in the matter of a couple of months. Whereas in the US, it's almost impossible. At best, you can go and beg them to let you retrofit one of their warehouses.
So the legacy mindset is an obstacle to adoption.
For sure.
You mentioned in passing the automotive space, you had mentioned Apollo, which is Baidu's approach to autonomous vehicles, which I think CB Insights research is called something of the Android approach, a dark horse to take on the Waymos and so on. What's your take on AI as it relates to autonomous vehicles? How bullish are you versus how cautious?
Yeah, I think the Apollo program that Baidu's been doing has been really informative for us because it has actually pulled together a lot of different participants. So not only are there a lot of big car companies, but there's also like big bus companies, garbage truck makers, like AGV companies that are doing sidewalk deliveries, like all types of people who are doing vehicle autonomy can use the Apollo platform, and it's open source. And that gives us insight into like what is possible right now and what's going to be possible in 3 years or 5 years. Personally, I see autonomy in transportation or on the road as one of the hardest problems for AI to solve. I don't think it's the most valuable short-term problem. There's a lot of areas like warehouses or construction sites or manufacturing facilities where it's a much more constrained problem set where AI can basically today go in and even if you can change the cost structure by 2% or 3%, in like, for example, a steel mill, that's a huge amount of cost savings, right? That can be tens of millions of dollars per month per plant. I think that there's a lot of lower hanging fruit than autonomy, but autonomy is this thing that's sexy, it's exciting, people can relate to it because everybody is in cars once in a while.
Sure.
And so when that happens, it drives a lot of interest, lots of media coverage, and a lot of investment in AI, which we think is good because the side effect is it attracts a lot of talent and a lot of spin-out technologies.
Right, but you're not betting the farm on autonomous, clearly.
Definitely not. Not as a VC fund, at least.
I understand. And that's interesting, given that China could well be one of the market that's taking the lead eventually in adoption,
Sure.
if not invention, of the technologies and the cars. We've talked a lot about China, but I think you're insistent that you should not be seen as a Chinese venture fund. You're a globally minded fund. Give us some specifics that might bolster that point. What share of your capital is from China, of your invested companies are in China, of your staff are Chinese versus non-Chinese? Give us a feeling for what your company's like operationally.
Yeah, I'd say probably about 80% of our capital comes from Chinese companies.
Okay.
About
not only Baidu.
Not only Baidu, yeah. Depending on because we have 4 funds, each fund is a little bit different in the makeup.
Okay.
Of our team, about 20 on the investment team are in Beijing, about 10 are in the Bay Area, and we have a few scattered in Israel, in Germany, and in the UK. And
are they mostly Chinese nationals or Chinese Americans? Or
the ones outside of China are mostly not. Yeah, are mostly not, but the ones in China are. I mean, I see myself as also kind of like a hybrid. So I spent about 16 years in China, and I went to school there, and I started a few companies there. And so, I think that more and more, I think that these boundaries are kind of becoming more and more artificial.
Sure.
So I don't really see myself as one or the other.
Well, I mean, I would have agreed with you until the last 2 years, where we've seen, obviously, moves out of Washington that are making it more difficult to have the porous borders and the sea turtles going back and forth between China as the brain circulation of Chinese talented engineers and others have been called. How have they affected you? The crackdown on Chinese investments through informally, CFIUS, but also just the climate in Silicon Valley. How much has that reduced your ability to make deals, or have you lost deals? Can please give us a sense, because it's very hard to penetrate that at the operational level, how it affects an outfit like yours.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think CFIUS is definitely something we're doing our absolute best to follow. I think there's still some ambiguity in terms of exactly how it's going to be applied, and so we're adopting every day, and we're learning, and we're trying our best. I think definitely in the long term, it's going to affect us a little bit, but I think that
any particular sectors, or I mean, obviously stuff that's directly related to defense.
Yeah, because
but beyond that, they could make the claim that a lot of early stage technologies could potentially go into defense sectors. And, so have we come to the stage where today people aren't returning your calls or aren't taking your money? Where are we in this spectrum at the moment?
Right now, I would say no. There's the occasional deal here and there that we've lost, and I think it's mostly because of misunderstandings of how these laws are going to get applied. From the kind of best efforts that we've taken, I think most of the things we've invested in to date don't seem like they're going to kind of fall into that area of control. You know, like for example, going back to this example of the company that sorts recycling, like, you know, yes, in some kind of hypothetical way it could be used for defense, but like that's definitely not what it's for. And then also as kind of passive minority investors, like it's not like we have access to their source code or major control in terms of what products they build or don't build. Like we're in it for the financial gains of that investment, and I think that's very clear in all the documents that we put together. So I don't think that there's a big chance for there to be a misunderstanding. I think that if anything, it's forcing us to be a lot more clear about what our intentions are, which is, I think, a good thing. There are definitely some who have nefarious intentions. Like, you know, there are a lot of kind of government-backed funds who come and try to grab up research and then try to kind of force it to go back to China and that kind of thing. And I think it's great because now it's differentiating us from them. Like, we're not in that boat and we're not trying to do that. And so I think it becomes very clear to the entrepreneur.
Now, you have some Western partners that co-invest or that have invested previously with you, right? What are a few of them? Presumably that they can vouch for you if need be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we've co-invested alongside a lot of kind of the typical Silicon Valley venture firms that do investments in deep tech, like Lux Capital, Data Collective, Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, Kleiner Perkins. I think we invest alongside them every day, or we invest earlier than them a lot of the time. So because of the things that we've seen at Baidu and the types of applications that they're able to recognize early on, or because of the deep research that we do, there's been many deals that we've invested in like the seed round, or even kind of like the first Genesis round is kind of what we think of it as.
Right.
And then they go get a Series A from kind of one of the typical Sand Hill Road investors.
At the operational level, have you seen any impact on your ability to attract talent, for example? What do you tell high-powered recruits when you know, they read the headlines, they see the concern? How do you explain to them the situation?
I don't think that there's too much of an issue. I mean, to be honest, like I wouldn't have joined Baidu Ventures if I didn't see it as having something very unique. So I was running my own venture fund, as were both of my partners. Each of us had funds that were managing, you know, multiple $100 million funds, and we all decided to leave that and come here. And the reason for that is because we felt like by giving up a certain portion of a kind of our brand or our kind of perceived independence, what we were getting in exchange were things that were mission critical for a lot of startups, right? Like going back to the access to data annotation.
Right, the resources you talked about.
Yeah, if there's two companies competing and one of them has access to 100 times more data annotation and 100 more times of labeled data versus the other one, the second company has no chance of survival. So I think that those are the types of things where we come in and say, what are the things that are mission critical for a startup in terms of success? And if we can really have those things, then there's no reason for us to lose out on a deal because those companies need us to survive. If it's just another source of capital where, to be honest, all the Silicon Valley VC firms on Sand Hill Road have the exact same value proposition. They come in and say, oh, I'll help you with connections. I'll help you with my network. I'll help you because I'm an experienced entrepreneur and I have all these amazing insights for you. I think that those kinds of things really don't hold as much water anymore. It comes down to kind of when the rubber hits the road, like what are the things that you can actually give me that can change my trajectory? And if you have those things, then I'll take it.
A couple of those would surely be access to one of the most dynamic large markets in the world, China, and the ability to scale phenomenally, which is one of the things that people like Reid Hoffman talk a lot about. You can do that in China extremely fast. And the third, which is an argument that Kai-Fu Lee's been making recently with his book, is that China's innovative capacity, whether it's Shenzhen in hardware or Beijing with AI. How do you handicap China's innovation potential in light of recent political events and ongoing sort of friction? Where does it stand vis-a-vis, say, Silicon Valley?
I think right now, what's become clear in the last few years is that when it comes to applications of AI, China has been in the lead. When it comes to core developments in the technology, the US has been in the lead, I think, up until now. How that's going to progress in the future, I'm not sure. But I think that to be honest, the startup environment and even the large company environment in China is much more competitive than what I've seen in the US. Even Silicon Valley, which is kind of hyped up as this fast-moving Uber, kind of fail fast, whatever. I don't see it as that way. I think, I'm sure you've heard about the kind of 996 mentality in China. People work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week at startups. A simple example, we have a portfolio company that builds smart locks, right? It sounds like a very kind of simple product, but their US counterpart has built over the last 3 or 4 years, like 2 or 3 versions of their product This company is now on product number 15, right? They've iterated super quickly. They already have tens of millions of units in people's houses. Like, after you've done 15 iterations of a product, there's no way that your product is going to be worse than somebody who's done 3 iterations. Like, it's going to be drastically better. And I think in AI, it's the same. Right? I think that because of this competitive environment, because of the types of capital that are available, and because of the scale of the applications, people are innovating much faster. They're saying, AI is this new tool. How can I use it to make a difference in my business? And then you see companies like...
I certainly agree. I love the last 5 years in China. It's the most hyper-Darwinian competition you'll find anywhere on Earth. So, in closing, I'm going to ask you a few over-under questions. You tell us if the following are overrated or underappreciated. First, Google.
Underappreciated.
Blockchain.
Underappreciated.
Alibaba.
Underappreciated.
That's interesting. Silicon Valley.
Oh, that's a hard one. It's, I think, moderately appreciated.
Moderately appreciated. All right.
That's fair.
A diplomatic answer to finish things out.
Yeah.
Great. Give them a nice round of applause for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Okay.